She sat alone at the edge of a crowded ballroom, staring at an empty chair the caterers had placed beside her, as if they were sure someone would come back for her. Around her, music swelled, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell like soft waves hitting a shore she no longer felt part of. The lights were warm, golden, gentle, yet Lauren's hand stayed cold against the stem of her champagne glass. She tried to look composed, like any other guest taking a quiet moment, but the truth pressed against her ribs. This was the kind of night where everyone seemed to belong to someone except her. And somewhere between the music and that stubborn, unclaimed chair, she wondered when exactly life had slipped from promise into something that looked a lot like standing off to the side, hoping no one noticed the loneliness she'd stopped admitting out loud. If you've ever felt left behind in a room full of people moving forward, this story might feel familiar. Let's begin. The worst part wasn't sitting alone at the wedding. It was the extra chair the caterers had set beside Lauren, as if they were certain someone would eventually claim it. The chair stood there in its crisp white cover, angled just slightly toward her, looking hopeful in a way she no longer knew how to be. Every time the ballroom doors opened and a gust of colder hallway air slipped in, the edge of the chair's ribbon fluttered, taunting her with the possibility that someone might walk in, tap her shoulder, and say they were here for her. No one did. She tried adjusting the skirt of her slate blue bridesmaid dress, smoothing the fabric over her lap, but it didn't help. The dress had been altered twice and still felt like it belonged to someone with fewer inches around the waist and a little more ease in her posture. The hem brushed awkwardly against her calves whenever she shifted, as if reminding her of every fitting she'd endured and every silent judgment she imagined the seamstress had held back. From across the ballroom, the other bridesmaids were laughing bright, effortless sounds that rose above the music and the clinking of glasses. Lauren had promised she'd join them again after guarding the bags just for a minute, but that minute had turned into half an hour. No one noticed she hadn't returned. Maybe they assumed she'd slipped out for a breath of air or gone to check on Mia at home. Maybe, she thought, they'd assumed the kind of things people assume about a woman her age who shows up alone. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, and she took one even though she already knew she shouldn't. The bubbles snapped sharply on her tongue, too sweet, too celebratory for the knot that had settled under her ribs. She set the glass down and folded her hands together, trying to look comfortable, trying to look like she chose this corner table, near the emergency exit sign that glowed red against the wall. A group of guests drifted past her couples, mostly with hands entwined or palms resting easily at the small of a back. One woman gave Lauren a polite smile, the kind people offer when they aren't sure whether to speak. Her gaze flicked to the empty seat beside Lauren, then back to Lauren herself. A small flicker of sympathy crossed the woman's face before she turned away. Lauren looked down at her hands. The nail polish she'd applied last night was already chipped at the thumbs. She curled her fingers to hide them, even though no one was looking. "Still just you and Mia." "Huh," a voice said as someone breezed past her table. She didn't even look up. She knew the tone. Light, careless, a distant relative who meant nothing by it, but somehow still managed to land the blow exactly where she was tender. The speaker was already gone before she could form a response. She lifted the champagne flute again, letting the cold glass press into her palm. Maybe if she focused on the sensation, cool, firm, grounding, she wouldn't notice the ache gathering in her chest. Maybe if she kept her back straight and her expression pleasant, she could disappear into a version of herself that didn't mind nights like this. But she minded, more than she wanted to admit. The music swelled as the band shifted into another upbeat song. Lauren watched Jenna, her younger cousin, glitter across the dance floor in the arms of her new husband. Jenna's face glowed with a kind of joy that made Lauren feel both protective and unexpectedly exhausted. At 29, Jenna still believed in a certain kind of forever. Lauren remembered what that felt like before the slow erosion of marriage, before the nights of quiet resentment stacked up like unpaid bills, before signing the papers that made her a single mother in a one-income household. Someone behind her laughed sharp, amused, a little too loud. Lauren wasn't trying to listen, but the words reached her anyway. "That's the cousin who got divorced. She looks lonely. Another voice responded, softer, but the pity was unmistakable. Well, would you want to sit by yourself in a room like this? They laughed again, not cruelly, but carelessly. Carelessness, she'd learned, could hurt more than cruelty. Lauren's fingers tightened around the base of her glass. She stared at the amber-lit dance floor, refusing to let her expression crack. Her instinct was to flee, to slip into the women's restroom, splash cold water on her face, wait out the embarrassment, but she didn't move. Something inside her, small but stubborn, told her to stay exactly where she was, to hold her ground, even if it was only a rented chair at the back of a ballroom. She inhaled slowly. The scent of roses and warm linen filled her lungs, mixed with the faint bite of champagne. She let the breath out through her nose, steadying herself 1 inch at a time. A waiter approached, offering more champagne. Lauren shook her head. "Not yet," she murmured, though she didn't know why she was saving herself from it. The ballroom doors opened again, and cold air brushed over her bare shoulders. She didn't look up at first. She didn't expect anything to change, not tonight. The world didn't usually shift for women like her, women who had spent years learning to make do. But she felt it before she saw it. A shift in the light. A figure stepping toward the empty chair beside her, blocking the glow of the hallway for a brief, startling moment. The ribbon on the chair fluttered again. This time, it wasn't the air. The song was wrong. It belonged in a cheaper room, with cheaper flowers, and a husband who used to pull her in a little too close, even when he stepped on her shoes. The first warm notes floated across the ballroom, soft and familiar, and Lauren froze with her hand halfway to her glass. It took only 3 chords for her throat to tighten. 14 years ago, she and Mark had chosen this exact song for their first dance, mostly because the band at their wedding only knew a handful of slow tracks. Still, she'd loved it. It had sounded hopeful back then, like a promise floating above everyone's heads. Now it sounded like a reminder. The chandelier light blurred at the edges as she blinked, and the ballroom around her faded into something simpler, folding chairs draped with wrinkled white covers, a rented arch wrapped in silk flowers that kept slipping, a buffet line that ran out of mashed potatoes too early. She remembered laughing about that last part, leaning into Mark's side as he promised to buy her all the mashed potatoes she wanted for the rest of her life. He'd looked ridiculous in the suit his mother insisted he wear too wide at the shoulders, too long at the sleeves, but he'd danced with her like he meant it. She could still feel the way he'd held her, both confident and shy. Mark had never been graceful. His 2 left feet were the reason their wedding video started with an apology from him, which the guests found hilarious. But when the music played, he'd tried, and she'd loved him for the trying. Her fingers brushed the rim of her champagne flute. The glass felt colder now. The memory dissolved into years that came after years. She didn't like to revisit, but couldn't escape tonight. Nights when Mark didn't come home until after Mia was asleep. Mornings when he ate breakfast standing at the counter while scrolling through his phone. Invitations that slowly stopped coming. Conversations that grew shorter, then sharper, then silent, not angry, just empty. Like 2 people standing back to back, each waiting for the other to say something brave. She remembered sending him a text one evening, asking if he'd be home for dinner. The message stayed unread for hours. When he finally walked through the door, the apology felt automatic, not felt. She had told herself it was work stress, responsibilities, timing. Eventually, she stopped asking, and he stopped explaining. The slow death of their marriage hadn't come with slammed doors or broken plates. It came with distanced little tiny inches of it until the house felt too big for the 2 of them. She remembered sitting on the couch one night, folding Mia's tiny socks while Mark watched a late-night game on mute. They sat 3 feet apart. It felt like miles. By the time they agreed to divorce, they were both tired enough to accept it without fighting. They signed the papers in a bland office with beige carpet and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. When Lauren stood to leave, she caught her reflection faintly in the glass, her hair pulled back neatly. But with a streak of gray near her temple she swore hadn't been there the month before. She remembered touching it as if it belonged to someone older, someone who had lived a different life. The song in the ballroom swelled, drawing her back to the present. Lauren blinked the memory back into its box and took a sip of champagne. But the bubbles didn't do what she hoped. They didn't soften the ache or loosen the knot. If anything, they sharpened it. A cluster of people drifted past her table, laughing in a carefree way that made her shoulders tense. Weddings had a way of making certain people feel young again, and making others feel older than they were. At 38, she was far from old, but tonight she felt the years stacked against her. Divorce had aged her in ways no one could see until moments like this. One of the bridesmaids, Julie, she thought ran by with her heels dangling from 2 fingers, hair bouncing. She waved breathlessly. "Lauren, come dance with us. It's your era music now." Then she disappeared into the crowd before Lauren could nod or shake her head. It didn't matter. Julie hadn't waited for an answer. Lauren lifted her glass again, telling herself it was just to have something to do with her hand. As the chorus rolled through the room, Jenna appeared, radiant in her satin gown, cheeks flushed from too much joy and too many toasts. She spun close to Lauren's table, paused just long enough to glance down at her with a soft smile, and mouthed, "Thank you for being here." Then she twirled away in her husband's arms. The moment was sweet, and it hurt. Lauren felt it like a gentle pressure under her ribs, genuine happiness for Jenna, laced with something heavier, not envy exactly. More like the quiet awareness that she'd once stood where Jenna stood now, believing forever was real and reachable. She wasn't bitter, just aware. For a second, she wondered if anyone else in the room felt the same way she did on the edge of something beautiful, but not part of it. She doubted it. She finished the last sip of champagne, the sweetness suddenly too much. If she drank fast enough, maybe she'd blur out the parts of the night that stung. Maybe she'd stop caring about the empty chair beside her, or the whispers she'd overheard, or the memory of warm hands guiding her in a clumsy dance 14 years ago. She set the glass down and reached automatically for another, but before her fingers closed around the stem, a quiet voice came from just behind her shoulder. "Careful," the man said. "They'll start refilling your glass out of pity, not celebration." Lauren stilled, her breath caught, sharp and involuntary. Who was this man who saw exactly what she was trying so hard to hide? He didn't slide onto the bar stool so much as claim it, like a man used to rooms rearranging around him. One moment, the space beside Lauren was just air and a scuffed strip of brass rail. The next, he was there. A dark suit and a quiet presence leaning against the bar as if he had nowhere else he needed to be. Lauren turned her head just enough to see him. Early 40s, she guessed. Maybe mid-40s. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, like he'd given up pretending to be perfectly put together an hour ago. His hair was dark, with a few threads of silver at the temples. Not the dyed, careful kind, but the honest sort that time left behind. "Excuse me," she said, the word tighter than she intended. He lifted his hands in a small surrender. "Just saying," he replied, voice low. "You keep eyeing that tray like it owes you something, and the staff are going to start offering you refills for the wrong reason." She stared at him, waiting for the smirk, the punchline, the pity. It didn't come. His mouth held a faint curve, but his eyes were steady. Gray. She noticed. A clear, cool kind of gray that didn't look away quickly the way most people did when they accidentally stepped on someone's sore spot. "I didn't realize there was a correct reason to drink at a wedding," Lauren said. "I must have missed that memo." "Celebration," he answered. "That's the official one, anyway. And you're the celebration police hardly." He glanced toward the packed dance floor, where bodies moved in a blur of dresses and jackets. "Let's just say I'm observing a fellow escape artist." She looked down at her empty glass and then back at him. "I'm not escaping. I'm on bag duty." His gaze flicked to the pile of clutches and shawls and one pair of glittery sneakers stacked on the chair at the other side of the table. "Ah, an important assignment. Someone has to do it," she said. "We can't leave the sequins unattended." That earned her a brief huff of a laugh. It was quiet, more exhale than sound, but it reached his eyes this time, softening something there. The bartender wandered over, towel slung over one shoulder. "Another for you, ma'am?" he asked Lauren. Then his attention snapped to the man beside her. "Evening, sir. Can I get you your usual?" There was a polite deference in the bartender's tone that made Lauren sit up a little straighter. She glanced between them, but the man just shook his head. "Whiskey," he said, "neat, and water for her." Lauren bristled. "I didn't ask for water." "No," he agreed, as if this were a simple fact. "But you look like someone who deserved the option." The bartender nodded and moved away. Lauren smoothed the skirt over her knees again, buying herself a second. "You always like this?" she asked, walking up to strangers and critiquing their drink choices. "I didn't critique," he replied. "I just commented on how pathetic I look. I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He studied her for a moment, not in the hungry way some men did, but like he was trying to read the fine print on something important. "For what it's worth," he said, "if I thought you were pathetic, I'd have stayed on the other side of the room." "Maybe you should have," she muttered, then immediately regretted it. The champagne had pushed her past the filter she usually kept tightly in place. He leaned his forearms on the bar, not quite facing her, but turned enough that she could see the profile of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble there. "If you want me to walk away," he said, "I will." The choice sat there between them, as clear as the two glasses the bartender set down a moment later, a neat amber pour for him, a tall, sweating glass of water in front of her, and then, almost as an afterthought, another flute of champagne. The bubbles climbed the inside of the glass like they were racing. Lauren looked at the water, then at the champagne. Her head was starting to glow with the dizzy warmth that came from drinking on not enough dinner. She knew the responsible choice. She also knew how lonely the rest of the night would feel if she sent this man away and went back to watching other people's happiness from the corner. She wrapped her fingers around the condensation on the water glass, then let go, picked up the champagne instead. "You can stay," she said finally. "For a minute, if you want." "That generous?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Don't push it." She took a sip, the sweetness coating the back of her throat. "So, what's your role in all this? You look too, tailored to be a +1 from my side of the family." He glanced down at his suit as if he hadn't thought about it all night. "I'm with the groom's side." "Of course you are," she said. "That tracks." "How so?" She gestured vaguely toward his cuffs, the watch on his wrist. It was simple but heavy-looking, the kind with a face that caught the light in a clean, sharp way. "You've got that business-something look," she said. "You're probably one of Alex's finance bros." One corner of his mouth lifted, but he didn't correct her. "Something like that." He said. She waited for more, an explanation, a joke, a humble shrug. Nothing came. He took a slow sip of his drink instead, eyes drifting back to the dance floor. The non-answer annoyed her more than if he'd bragged. It reminded her of the way certain people at corporate meetings answered questions vague enough to keep their options open, specific enough to sound like they'd said something. "You know," she went on, hearing the edge in her own tone, "if this is your idea of small talk, you might want to workshop it. Something like that doesn't exactly invite conversation." "Maybe I'm not trying to invite conversation," he said lightly. "Then why are you here?" He looked back at her, really looked this time. "I'm still figuring that out." "For a heartbeat." That answer disarmed her. She wasn't expecting honesty, not in a room full of polished smiles and scripted toasts. She'd come armed for small talk and sideways comments. Not for directness. "Well," she said, because the silence was starting to feel like it was pressing against her skin. "You've officially joined the saddest table in the room. Congratulations." "I've been at worse tables," he said, "and I doubt this is the saddest." "Oh, it is," she insisted. "You're looking at the designated sad cousin in the corner. Every wedding has one, and that's you." She raised her hand briefly, like she was volunteering for something she didn't want. "Divorced, came alone, sitting next to an empty chair. I'm hitting all the marks." He considered that, then shook his head. "You don't look sad," he said quietly. "You look tired, and like you're trying very hard not to care what any of them think." She didn't have a good response for that, mostly because it was too close to how she actually felt. "If you're going to psychoanalyze me," she said, "I'm going to need more than champagne." "Good thing you've got water," he replied. She snorted. "You really want me to drink that, don't you?" "I want you to have a choice," he said. "Not everyone here does tonight." She wondered what he meant by that, but some instinct told her not to ask yet. Instead, she tipped the champagne toward him in a small, mock toast. "You came to the wrong table if you wanted light conversation," she said. "I should warn you, I've had a long year, and poor impulse control with honesty when bubbly is involved. Honesty's rare around here," he said. "I'll take my chances." She studied him. The loosened tie, the hair that had probably started the evening perfectly in place, the lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of laughter and late nights in equal measure. He didn't have the hungry, restless energy of the younger men she'd seen circling the open bar. There was a steadiness in him, something worn in. He could be dangerous, a voice in her head suggested. Not in the way women were told to fear, but in the way someone could make you remember you once wanted more. She took another sip and set the glass down with a soft click. "You want a story," Lauren said. "More to the glass than to him." "Fine. I'll give you one." She had no idea yet how much of herself she was about to lay bare in front of a man whose last name she didn't even know. If anyone at the bar had asked, Lauren would have said she was fine. But apparently, her third glass of champagne had filed for permission to speak on her behalf. Words began slipping out of her before she could dress them up or smooth their edges. It started with a half laugh, the kind people make when they're trying to pretend something isn't painful. "So," she said, lifting her flute slightly as if in a mock toast, "you wanted a story. Lucky you. I'm full of them tonight." The man rested one elbow lightly on the bar, not pushing, not crowding her. "Only if you want to tell it." "Oh, I definitely shouldn't," she muttered. "That's the fun part." She took another sip too big and exhaled slowly. The band behind them slid into a softer melody, something warm and slow that made the air around her feel heavier. "You know what's funny?" she asked, even though her tone said she didn't think it was funny at all. "People look at me and assume I'm handling my life. Not thriving, obviously, just handling it. As if that's a compliment." He didn't answer, so she kept going. "It's been 4 years since the divorce. Mia was 7. I thought that would be the hardest part, motherhood on my own. And it was. But it wasn't just the parenting. It was..." She trailed off, picking at the edge of the paper coaster beneath her drink. "It was the constant, almost." He tilted his head. "Almost," she nodded, swallowing around the tightening in her throat. "Almost enough money, almost enough energy, almost enough time, always one car repair away from panic mode, one sick day away from losing the little savings we had." She let out a breath that sounded like a thin laugh. Some women reinvent themselves after divorce. They travel, get promotions, start yoga. "I just learned how to stretch every grocery list until it begged for mercy." He listened in a way she hadn't expected, quiet, steady, without trying to fix anything. It made something behind her ribs loosen and ache at the same time. "And now there's Jenna," she said, glancing toward the dance floor. "Beautiful, 29, practically glowing, marrying into money, stability, a whole family who can't wait to welcome her." She shook her head. "She deserves it. God, she really does. She's a good kid. I helped raise her. I love her." Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "But standing in that bridesmaid lineup tonight, it hit me. Harder than I expected." He shifted slightly, turning toward her without interrupting. "I almost didn't come," she admitted, voice softer now. "I told her I was sick, twice. Then I deleted the texts. Because what was I supposed to say? 'Sorry, sweetie, I don't want to be the lonely older bridesmaid ruining your photos.' Not exactly festive." "You didn't ruin anything," he said quietly. "You didn't see the pictures," she said with a small, self-deprecating smile. The lighting loves the 20-somethings. I just reflect it back like a mirror ball in human form. He chuckled, but his eyes didn't mock her. It's not just the photos, she went on. It's feeling like every year that passes pushes me further into some leftover category. You know, like the bins at Target after Valentine's Day. All the shiny, desirable things gone. And just the weird mismatched pieces left behind. The words surprised her. They were sharper than she meant them to be, truer than she wished they were. The bar's dim blue light brushed against the side of her face, giving her reflection in the mirror behind the bottles a faint, tired hue. "You shouldn't talk about yourself like that," he said. "I'm just being realistic." Or rehearsed, he said. Sounds like something you've told yourself more than once. She blinked at him, caught off guard by the accuracy of it. His voice wasn't accusing, it was observant, maybe a little sad. "There's also the career part," she added before she could stop herself. "Everyone keeps talking about climbing ladders, finding passion, discovering their true calling. Meanwhile, I've been in the same job for almost a decade. Good enough paycheck, decent benefits, no upward mobility in sight. I'm the dependable one. The one who trains new hires and covers shifts and knows how to fix the printer. But promotions." She made a small gesture with her hand. "Those happen to people with more sparkle, I guess." "Sparkle seems overrated," he said. "Tell that to the married people on the dance floor," she fired back. He didn't smile this time. He just watched her for a long moment, expression unreadable. She ran her thumb along the condensation on her glass. She could feel herself slipping, the champagne tugging her closer toward confessions she usually kept locked tight. She tried to pull back, to keep something for herself, but the frustration inside her felt too full tonight. "You want to hear the worst part?" she asked, her voice barely above the hum of the room. He nodded once. She inhaled shakily. "I'm 38. 38. And I already feel like the window for good things is closing. Like I'm..." She faltered, the word catching in her throat. "Like I'm on the leftover shelf. The part of life no one browses unless they're desperate or bored." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter and soft, like something trying not to break. She waited for him to offer a generic reassurance, something like, "You're doing fine," or "You're still young." But he didn't. He turned slightly, enough that she could see the seriousness in his eyes, the quiet certainty there. "Who told you your expiration date was 35? He asked. The sentence landed harder than any comfort could have. Lauren felt it like a jolt, unexpected, disarming. She stared at him, feeling suddenly, painfully sober in all the places that mattered. He said it like someone who had argued with that same cruel voice inside his own head. And it terrified her how much she wanted to ask him why. The word success sounded strange coming from his mouth, like it was something he'd bought at full price and then realized he couldn't return. He said it casually, almost offhand, right after taking a slow sip of his whiskey. But the way his jaw shifted afterward told Lauren that casual was the last thing it was. "On paper," he said, fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "I've done well. Better than I expected." "Honestly?" Lauren lifted her brows. "You don't say..." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had more shape. "I know. I look like the type." "You do," she admitted. "You have that polished exhaustion going on, like a man who owns too many suits and not enough sweatpants." He smiled, the first real one she'd seen from him, small but honest. It softened the sharp angles of his face. "Maybe you're right," he said, "though I can't remember the last time I put on sweatpants." "That's tragic." "It is," he said, with a nod that made it clear he wasn't joking. The bar lights caught the edge of his watch again. It was subtle, not the flashy kind, but expensive in a way that didn't need to announce itself. His cufflinks matched a quiet kind of luxury. The bartender had recognized him too, not by name, but by aura, and the way he stood, scanning the room with the same calm authority as someone used to making decisions that affected other people that didn't escape her either. Still, none of that mattered as much as the heaviness in his voice when he continued. I used to think success would fix things, he said. Loneliness, especially, like if I worked hard enough, earned enough, built enough. He paused, searching for the right words. It would all feel worth it. And Lauren asked gently, it didn't. The honesty in that simple sentence nudged something inside her chest. She leaned her elbows on the bar, mirroring him without realizing it. Most people don't admit that, she said softly. Especially not men who, well, she gestured vaguely at him. Who look like you? He huffed a small laugh, but his eyes didn't lift. Yeah. We're supposed to be grateful. No complaints, no cracks. Are there cracks? He looked at her then, really looked, and if she hadn't had 3 glasses of champagne, the weight of that eye contact might have made her sit back. I lost someone, he said quietly, years ago, because I chose work over everything. I didn't mean to. I just kept telling myself I'd make time later. His fingers tightened faintly on the glass, but later ran out. Lauren's breath hitched just slightly. She didn't ask who the person was, wife, partner, or someone else entirely. Something in the set of his shoulders told her the details weren't what he was offering. What mattered was the truth underneath it. Regret carved into a man who looked like life should have treated him better. I'm sorry, she said. He nodded, accepting the words but not needing them. It's strange. You build a life thinking you know exactly what matters. And then one day, you realize you were climbing the wrong side of the ladder. She let the silence settle for a moment. It wasn't uncomfortable, just sober. You sound like a man with a very expensive office, she said gently, trying to lift the weight without dismissing it. He glanced down the bar, something like that. There it was again, that vague, intentional deflection. But now she heard the fatigue underneath. Not secrecy, not arrogance. Just a man who hadn't figured out how to talk about himself without giving too much away. Lauren studied him with a new lens. Earlier, she'd put him in a box Groom's side, wealthy, untouchable, confident, probably surrounded by people who said yes to him. But sitting here, he seemed less like someone above her life and more like someone adjacent to it, hurt in different ways. But hurt all the same. Let me guess, she said lightly. You're very important, very busy, and everyone assumes you're fine too. He gave her a dry look. Cute, but true more than I'd like. She exhaled slowly, her earlier irritation melting into recognition. Loneliness didn't discriminate. It ate through mansions and starter homes the same way. You know, she said, tapping her nail softly on the base of her glass. I had this whole speech earlier about being a leftover, about how everything good happens to younger women, and I've somehow aged into invisibility. And now here you are, telling me success didn't save you either. He nodded once. It didn't. I kept thinking the next deal, the next milestone, the next year would feel different, but it just didn't. His honesty surprised her. Men like him didn't usually confess this sort of thing, especially not to women they'd met an hour ago in a ballroom full of strangers. She felt herself softening toward him, toward the night, maybe even toward herself. Funny, she murmured. You look like someone who gets everything he wants. He shook his head slowly. I've gotten a lot of what I asked for, not what I wanted. The distinction sent a ripple through her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the wedding faded to a soft hum behind them, the clink of silverware, the swell of voices, the faint scent of roses drifting from the centerpieces. Then he said something she didn't expect. I haven't had a real conversation like this at a wedding in maybe ever. She blinked. The way he said it low, sincere, left no ambiguity. He meant this conversation, with her. Warmth rose in her chest. Not romantic, not yet, but human. A small recognition, two people who weren't used to being seen suddenly seeing each other. Before she could respond, the band shifted into a slow melody, the kind that gathered couples onto the dance floor, like tide pulling in from the shore. Soft lights dimmed overhead, casting the room in a gentle amber glow. He turned his head toward the dance floor, watching the movement, then looked back at her. The question wasn't on his lips yet, but it sat there in his eyes, hesitant, unsure, almost vulnerable. Lauren felt her pulse trip slightly. Was he about to ask her to dance, or was he about to leave before the moment became too real? The last time Lauren had let a man rest his hand at the small of her back, the DJ had been playing a song that promised forever. That promise was gone. The muscle memory wasn't. So, when Daniel extended his hand quietly, without flourish, palm up as if offering nothing more than a moment, her pulse stuttered. The ballroom lights softened into warm gold, and the first measures of a slow song drifted across the room like a familiar tide. She stared at his hand for one long second before placing hers inside it. He didn't pull. He waited. And somehow, that made her step toward him. The dance floor felt bigger once she was on it, the way it used to feel when she was a teenager trying not to trip over her own feet. Couples swayed around them in gentle circles. The bride's gown swept past like a floating cloud. And there she was, 38, buzzed, barefoot inside borrowed heels, about to dance with a man whose last name she didn't even know. Daniel's hand settled at her back, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. Lauren inhaled sharply. Her body tightened instinct, memory, fear. She hadn't been held like this in years. "You don't have to," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I'd like to." His voice was steady, not demanding. It steadied her too. They moved slowly, barely shifting side to side, the kind of slow dance that required no skill, just presence, close enough to feel the rhythm of each other's breathing. Lauren kept her eyes on his collarbone. At first it was easier than looking at his face. She could see the faint crease in his shirt where he'd loosened his tie. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, the subtle tension there, as if this moment meant something to him too. "You dance like someone who's done this before," he murmured. She let out a breath of a laugh. "You're assuming good things." "No," he said. "Just noticing you're not fighting it." She didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. They swayed in silence until her nerves eased enough for words. "Mia hates when I dance," she said lightly, surprising herself. "She says I look like I'm concentrating too hard. You have a daughter." There was warmth in his voice, quiet and genuine. "She's 11, smart, stubborn, obsessed with marine biology and telling me when I'm being overprotective." He smiled. She could feel it rather than see it. "Sounds like she's good for you?" "She is," Lauren said softly. "She saved me, honestly. After the divorce, she made everything feel less empty." He nodded, the hand at her back gently guiding them into a slow turn. "And your parents?" he asked. "Getting older," she said with a sigh. "Needing more help, and pretending they don't." "That's familiar," he said. She glanced up at him, catching the shadow that crossed his face. But before she could ask, he shifted the conversation. "And work," she groaned quietly. "Don't get me started. That bad." "Oh, it's fine," she said. "Just fine. I spend all day helping other people get promoted while convincing myself I don't mind staying put." She hesitated. "Some days I wonder if I'm just supporting cast in my own life." He slowed their steps, looking down at her in a way that made her breath catch. "You don't believe that?" "I do," she said, barely audible. "Tonight, especially, everyone else Jenna. Her friends there center stage, and I'm just here, filling space." He shook his head once, decisive. "You're not a supporting character." She huffed, a thin attempt at humor. "You've known me for an hour." "I've known you long enough," he said, voice low, steady, "and not tonight, not to me." Her chest tightened, hard. The ballroom dimmed at the edges. For a fleeting second, her body reacted before her logic could intervene. Her shoulders softened, her forehead nearly brushed the edge of his jaw, and she let her weight settle just slightly toward him. A tiny surrender, a breath she hadn't meant to give. She pulled herself upright a beat later, but it was too late. She felt what her body had done, and so did he. Her cheeks warmed, Her fingers curled lightly at the back of his shoulder. She wasn't used to being wanted not like this, not without someone asking for something in return. It scared her more than she expected. "This is dangerous," she murmured. "Dancing?" he asked, feeling comfortable. His breath left him in something close to a laugh. But it wasn't amusement, it was recognition. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know that one." They kept moving, slow and close, two people orbiting the possibility of something neither of them had planned for. Then, just as she felt the room fade and her heart steady into the rhythm of his, a voice cut through the music from the edge of the dance floor. "Daniel, your brother's looking for you?" Lauren stiffened slightly, turning her head toward the voice. A man in a tailored suit stood near the tables, waving Daniel over. "Brother." Her focus snapped back to Daniel. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't immediately step away, but the air between them shifted. Daniel, brother, success, recognition from staff, the calm authority, the suit, the watch. What exactly had she stepped into? It took one word billionaire to turn Lauren's champagne courage into something cold and heavy in her stomach. She heard it the moment Daniel stepped away, crossing the dance floor toward the man who had called his name. A guest at the next table leaned in to whisper to another, the kind of whisper meant to be overheard. "Pierce Holdings," the woman said, wide-eyed. "Their family money practically built half the skyline." Her companion let out a low whistle. "Alex married well. That brother of his. He's the one who runs most of it now." Lauren froze. The room didn't tilt exactly, but it grew sharper around the edges. Too bright, too loud. Pierce. As in that Pierce. She knew the name everyone in Chicago did. It sat on buildings downtown, metal letters catching sunlight like they owned it. She looked toward Daniel, but now all she saw was the suit she hadn't fully noticed before, the posture of someone accustomed to attention, the quiet confidence that had suddenly taken on a new meaning. The watch she'd brushed off earlier wasn't just nice. It was the kind of watch people saved for years to buy or never could. Her cheeks warmed with humiliation. She had told him everything about scraping by, about feeling like a leftover, about being a supporting character, about her life feeling small and worn at the edges. And she'd told all of that to the richest man in the room. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass until she forced herself to put it down. She needed air, or the exit. Maybe both. She stepped back from the dance floor, careful not to stumble, careful to look as though she'd only wandered off for a moment. The carpet felt too soft beneath her heels, the chandelier too elegant, the whole room suddenly too aware of her. She reached the edge of the ballroom and leaned briefly against a column, pulling in a slow breath. Of course he would be someone like that. She should have known. Men with hands that steady, with eyes that patient, with voices that calm, those men didn't end up with women like her. They ended up with people like Jenna Bright, fearless, perfect for photographs. "You're out of your league," the old voice in her head whispered. "Don't embarrass yourself more than you already have." She let out a strained laugh and straightened. The safest thing was to make a joke out of everything. It always had been. If she got to the punchline first, no one else could. She spotted her table and hurried toward it, weaving past guests, ignoring the sting rising behind her eyes. She grabbed her clutch, ready to disappear for a moment. Bathroom, hallway, anywhere she could breathe without feeling like the entire room was taller than she was. She'd made it almost to the doors before a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You left fast." Her shoulders tensed. She turned slowly. Daniel stood a few steps away, sleeves pushed back slightly, tie still loose, eyes searching her face with quiet concern. He didn't look like the billionaire version of himself. He looked like the man who had listened to her at the bar, steady and present. She lifted her chin and forced a smile. "Sorry. I figured you had, important people to talk to." A crease formed between his brows. "Lauren, it's fine," she said quickly, waving a hand. "Really? I didn't realize." She stopped, unable to say the word billionaire out loud without choking on it. I didn't know who you were." He stepped closer, not enough to corner her, but enough that she felt the warmth of him again, unsettling in all the ways her heart didn't need tonight. "If it helps," he said gently. "I liked our conversation better before you knew my last name." Something in her flickered, but she shut it down. "Yeah, well," she said, forcing a brittle laugh. "That makes one of us." He tilted his head slightly. "One of us. Come on, Daniel." She folded her arms, trying to look amused instead of wounded. "You show up in the nicest suit here. Everyone treats you like royalty. And I just told you my entire midlife crisis between sips of cheap champagne." His expression softened, but she couldn't bear the sympathy in it. "And let me guess," she continued, voice sharper than she intended. "Now you're going to tell me I shouldn't feel embarrassed because you're just a normal guy who happens to run a multi-billion-dollar company." He let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. "I wasn't going to say that." "Well, good," she said, "because I'm not drunk enough to pretend this isn't absurd." He glanced toward the dance floor, then back at her. He didn't look offended. He looked disappointed, but she couldn't process that. Not with her pulse pounding this hard. "Lauren," he said quietly, "what's happening right now isn't about my last name. Isn't it?" Her voice cracked almost imperceptibly. "Because suddenly I feel like some charity case you decided to entertain." His jaw tightened, not with anger, but something closer to hurt. "That's not what this is," he said. She shook her head. "Then what was it?" "A charity dance with the divorced cousin." The words came out more hollow than sharp, almost a plea wrapped inside a joke. She regretted them instantly, but it was too late. They hung between them, fragile and painful. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He stood still, watching her the way a man watches a window just before it breaks, trying to decide whether to reach out or let the shards fall. Lauren felt her breath catch in her throat. What would he say? Would he confirm her worst fear? Or would he give her a reason, any reason to believe she hadn't just made a fool of herself in front of the one person tonight who had truly seen her? She wasn't sure which possibility scared her more. If humiliation had a sound, Lauren was pretty sure it was the word Single shouted over a love song. The moment rang in her ears before the meaning even settled. A tipsy relative, she couldn't remember the woman's name. Just the jangling bracelets and the way her perfume arrived a full second before she did had swayed up to them, grinning too widely. Lauren, the woman, had declared, voice bright and careless. "You clean up nice for a single mom?" The words were sharp enough to cut through the music. A few heads turned. Not many, but enough. Enough for Lauren's chest to go tight. Enough for her back to straighten in that instinctive posture she'd practiced since the divorce, the one meant to say, "I'm fine. I'm not thrown." This doesn't hurt, but it did. It hurt in that dull, familiar way. The way her friends' tone sometimes shifted when they talked about their intact marriages. The way coworkers assumed she couldn't attend evening events because she had her hands full. The way she felt every time a form asked for marital status and she checked a box that once would have surprised her. She forced a smile. "Well, thank you," she said, trying to keep her voice light. The relative giggled, already moving on. "Didn't know you had a date tonight," she added, looking between Lauren and Daniel as though she'd stumbled onto scandal. Lauren opened her mouth. She didn't even know what she meant to say. Deny it. Joke pretend. None of this stung, but Daniel spoke first. He stepped forward, posture easy but sure, and offered his hand to the woman. "I'm Daniel," he said warmly. "Lauren's date for the evening." Lauren felt her breath catch. Heat shot through her, not the champagne kind, but a startled, grounding warmth she hadn't expected. The relative blinked, flustered. "Oh, well, good for you two," she said, before wobbling away in search of another drink. Silence settled between Lauren and Daniel for a heartbeat, thick but not uncomfortable. She looked at him slowly, as though turning to face something she wasn't sure she had the right to look at directly. "You didn't have to say that," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's why I said it." Her throat tightened. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't teasing. He was simply there, calm and steady, standing between her and the pity that had almost landed on her shoulders like a heavy drape. Her instinct, as always, was to apologize to Shrink, to make the tension easier for everyone else. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "She gets loud when she drinks." "You didn't do anything wrong," Daniel said. He spoke gently, but with enough strength that she felt the truth push against her denial. People sometimes forget that their words land on real lives. Real lives. Hers felt suddenly too visible. And yet, for the first time tonight, not in a way that made her want to disappear. She took a small step back, needing space to breathe. They moved toward a quieter corner near the tall windows overlooking the city. The view was softened by the glow of streetlights below, Chicago shimmering in soft gold. Daniel leaned his shoulder lightly against the window frame as she gathered herself. "You think I approached you out of pity," he said quietly. "But that's not true." Her pulse fluttered. "Then why did you—" "I noticed you earlier," he said. "Before the ceremony started. You helped the older aunt with her seat when no one else saw her struggling. And when the florist dropped a box, you were the only one who bent down to help pick it up." She blinked. "That was nothing. It wasn't," he said. "You looked present, kind, human." He hesitated, then added, "This room is full of people performing. You weren't—" A flush rose in her chest, warm and frighteningly close to gratitude. She wasn't used to feeling seen for anything other than what she lacked. She tried to steady herself with humor. "So, you chose the honest one in the room," she said with a weak smile. "You say that like it's a small thing." His voice softened. "It isn't." Lauren looked down at her hands, at the soft tremor in her fingers. She curled them slightly, hiding the shake. Her life wasn't glamorous. She carried grocery lists in the pockets of coats she'd had for years. She kept Mia's school notices clipped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a dolphin. She worked hard, paid bills, patched up tears, kept going even when she felt like something essential inside her had gone quiet. And somehow, this man, this wildly successful, untouchable man, had noticed the parts of her she thought were invisible. The ballroom lights dimmed again as another song began. She watched the dance floor in the distance, couples swaying, the bride laughing as someone spun her around. A familiar ache rose in her chest, not envy exactly, but the sting of a life she'd once thought she would have forever. "What you said earlier?" Daniel murmured, pulling her attention back to him, about feeling like a supporting character. She tensed. "I don't see you that way," he said. She swallowed, unable to speak. From the far side of the room, someone called out a toast. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, but here, in this quiet pocket by the windows, the world narrowed to the space between them. She finally found her voice. "Why did you say you were my date?" His gaze held hers steadily. "Because I didn't want that moment to define you, and because I didn't like someone speaking about you like you were less—" The words landed softly, then fully. Less. She had feared that for years. Tonight had pressed every bruise, and yet here he was, undoing it with simple truth. "They weren't speaking about you," he added. "They were speaking around you. You deserved someone to stand in the way." Her breath trembled out. A long silence followed, quiet but alive, like a held note. Daniel shifted slightly. "Lauren," he said, voice low but unmistakably intentional. Would it be all right if that didn't have to be a lie? Her heart stilled. He wasn't asking for a dance. He wasn't offering pity. He wasn't making a joke. He was asking if he could stand beside her. Really stand beside her beyond the next 10 minutes. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Because she genuinely didn't know what scared her more, saying no, or saying yes. The valet brought up a sleek black sedan for someone in front of them, and a dusty compact car for someone behind. Lauren stood between both, pulling her shawl a little tighter, wondering which car her life actually belonged in. The night air carried the faint bite of Lake Michigan, brushing her bare arms as if reminding her she was, once again, stepping back into the real world. Daniel stayed beside her, hands tucked loosely in his pockets, his posture unhurried despite the line of guests filing out around them. He looked nothing like the man who ran a multi-billion-dollar company. Not tonight. Not standing under the dim hotel awning with his tie undone and his eyes following her movements with quiet attention. She tried, really tried not to overthink it. "Thank you for walking me out," she said. "It wasn't a question," he replied. A small laugh escaped her, softer than she meant. Her heart tightened. The rideshare icon on her phone blinked, arriving in 2 minutes. She curled her fingers nervously around the strap of her clutch. Daniel glanced at her screen, then back at her. "Before you go, could I have your number?" Her breath stilled. He didn't lean closer. He didn't rush. He simply offered the question like he offered everything tonight, with space for her to step away if she needed to. "Only," he added gently, "if tomorrow you still think tonight was something worth remembering." She looked at him. Really looked at him then. The crease by his eyes, the faint exhaustion he carried, like a man who'd been successful long enough to recognize its limits. And beneath all that, something steady and patient, something that frightened her in its sincerity. Her voice came out small. "I'll remember it." He didn't smile widely, just a soft shift at the corner of his mouth. "Then I'd like to hear from you. In the morning, afternoon, whenever it feels right." She swallowed, then typed her number into his phone. Her thumbs shook slightly annoyingly, so she steadied them by holding the phone with both hands. When she gave it back, their fingers brushed, a fleeting touch, enough to spark a trail of warmth up her arm. Her rideshare pulled up a silver sedan with a cracked taillight and an air freshener dangling from the mirror. The contrast hit her again, the wedding's luxury behind her, the quiet reality of her life in front. Daniel opened the door for her. "Let me know when you're home." She nodded, slipping in carefully so her dress didn't snag. He closed the door gently, as though she were something fragile. She wasn't used to that. Not anymore. As the car pulled away, she looked back over her shoulder. Daniel hadn't moved. He stood there, hands in pockets, watching her leave. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did, more than she wanted to admit. Chicago blurred past the window, streetlights smearing into soft streaks, late-night diners glowing in patches of warm neon, a couple arguing on a corner, a man walking his dog beneath a halo of lamplight. Real life. Her life. The driver hummed tunelessly to the radio. Lauren leaned her head against the cool glass and exhaled. She reached for habit, then opened her banking app, scrolling through numbers that never changed enough. Mortgage, utilities, Mia's extracurricular payments due next week, groceries. Her stomach tightened the way it always did. 2 different worlds, his and hers. She wondered how foolish she had been to think they could overlap, even for a moment. She wondered if that was all tonight had been, a moment, warm but fleeting, something borrowed from a life she didn't belong to. Her phone buzzed. She sat up quickly, heart quickening. A text from an unknown number. "Home safe. Or should I worry?" Just 10 words. Simple, not possessive, not presumptive. But something about them steadied her heartbeat instead of scattering it. She stared at the screen a long moment before typing. Then, deleting, typing again. Deleting again. She wasn't good at this part, letting someone see the soft places she'd spent years defending. Tonight had stripped too many layers already. Finally, she exhaled and typed 3 short sentences. Home, feet hurt, heart confused. She stared at the message, not polished, not clever, but honest. Her thumb hovered. Then she sent it. The message bubble slid upward, final and frightening and strangely freeing. She sat back, phone resting in her lap, wondering if she'd regret it in the morning. Wondering what he would say when sunlight replaced champagne, when responsibility replaced music, when the real world replaced the small universe they'd stepped into together. Would the version of him she met tonight survive the cold clarity of tomorrow? The smell of burned toast and school glue grounded Lauren far more than last night's chandeliers ever had. Sunlight pushed through the thin curtains and slanted beams, catching dust in the air, making her modest kitchen look softer than it usually did at 7 in the morning. A half-made school lunch lay open on the counter, apple slices browning at the edges, pretzels in a small plastic bag, a yogurt cup waiting to be tossed into Mia's lunchbox. A math worksheet was tucked under a cereal bowl. Somehow, her house always carried the faint scent of crayons, no matter how often she cleaned. This was real, familiar, predictable. So, unlike the night before, Mia shuffled in, still in her pajamas, hair tangled and one sock missing. She scrunched her nose. "Mom, you burned the toast again." Lauren forced a grin. "It's my signature cooking style. You could have just made waffles." "Waffles take effort," she said, brushing crumbs off the counter. "Toast is artistic." Mia laughed, and for a moment everything felt steady, safe, the kind of morning that wrapped life in its usual, manageable routine. But then Lauren's phone buzzed on the table. Her heart lurched, not a gentle flutter, but a hard thud. She glanced at the screen, a text from Daniel, sent just after she'd fallen asleep. "Confused as fair. Coffee might help." She stared at the short message for a long moment. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't dramatic, but it was him, and it was real. She locked her phone quickly before Mia could ask anything more than the innocent questions she'd already posed about the wedding. Did the cake taste good? Was Aunt Jenna pretty? Did you dance? Lauren answered vaguely, keeping last night tucked somewhere quiet inside her. After dropping Mia at school, quick goodbyes, forgotten gloves, a kiss to her daughter's forehead, Lauren returned to the house feeling the weight of the text all over again. She made coffee, the cheap grocery store kind she always bought on sale, poured it into her chipped mug, and sat at the small dining table where bills were stacked beneath a candle she'd meant to light for months. She read Daniel's message again. Coffee might help. Her pulse fluttered with something too fragile to name. But as the morning stretched, so did her doubt. By 10, she'd convinced herself he was only being polite. By 11, she decided he wouldn't actually follow through. By 11:30, she almost felt relieved. Hope was heavy. Disappointment. She knew how to handle. She washed dishes, folded laundry, checked her bank balance out of habit, wincing at the number staring back. She straightened the living room, rearranged the throw pillows, then moved them back because nothing looked right. Her thoughts looped, circling the same quiet fear. Last night had been beautiful because it wasn't real life. Men like Daniel didn't call women like her in the daylight. Her phone rang at 12:07. She froze, a damp dish towel in her hand. The screen lit with an unknown number. Her heart stung with something sharp anticipation or dread. She couldn't tell. She could let it go to voicemail. Pretend she was busy. Pretend she didn't notice. Safe choices. Sensible choices. Her thumb hovered. She answered, "Hello?" Her voice cracked slightly. Lauren Daniel sounded nervous, not polished, not controlled, as if he had been pacing too. "Hi, it's Daniel from last night. Not that there are multiple Daniels who danced with you. He exhaled, a small, breathy laugh. "Wow, I'm really bad at this." She blinked. The richest man she'd ever met was stumbling over hello. "I'm glad you called," she said carefully. "Yeah," his voice lifted, hopeful in a way that made her chest warm. "Yeah, that's good," he said, recovering a little. "I wasn't sure if you needed space after last night, or if you decided I talked too much, or not enough, or God, ignore me. I'm a mess." She smiled, sinking into her chair. "You're human." "That's debatable," he said lightly, earning her first real laugh of the day. Then he cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might want to meet for coffee. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with fewer sequins." Her stomach fluttered, equal parts fear and wanting. "What were you thinking?" she asked. "There's a small cafe on Lakeshore," he said. "It's nothing fancy. I go there when I need to think. We could talk, or not talk, or just sit and reintroduce ourselves without champagne." Her fingers tightened around the phone. The idea felt terrifying in its simplicity. Daylight left no shadows to hide in. No dim ballroom glow to soften her insecurities. If he saw her now, her real life, her real edges, would he still want to sit across from her? She thought of Mia's cereal bowl with math homework tucked underneath, the messy table, the bills, the smallness of her world. And then she remembered the way he'd watched her leave last night, the way his voice had softened on her name, the way he'd stepped in to protect her dignity without making her feel fragile. Courage wasn't loud. Sometimes it was quiet, barely noticeable, like answering a phone when your heart wanted to hide. "Okay," she said, almost a whisper. "I'd like that." There was a pause, then a soft, relieved exhale from his end. "Great. 2 o'clock. 2 is good. Perfect. I'll text you the address." They exchanged a few more gentle words. Nothing dramatic, just the tender awkwardness of two people trying to treat something fragile with care. When she hung up, the silence in the room felt louder. She stared at the phone, at her reflection faintly visible in the dark screen. Her pulse ticked in her throat. Then panic flooded in, swift, overwhelming, merciless. What was she doing? What was she thinking? Meeting him in the sober brightness of a Sunday afternoon, letting him see her without armor, without lighting, without the blur of sparkling wine. What if last night dissolved under daylight? What if she did? She pressed her hands to the table, grounding herself as the kitchen hummed quietly around her. She had said yes, and now she had to decide whether she was brave enough to mean it. In daylight. He didn't look like a headline. He looked like a man who hadn't learned where to put his hands when he wasn't holding a briefcase. Lauren saw him through the front window of the coffee shop as she walked up. He stood near the counter in jeans and a navy sweater, not a suit in sight. One hand rested awkwardly on the back of a chair, the other wrapped around a paper cup he hadn't started drinking from yet. His hair was a little less controlled than the night before, a hint of curl at the nape of his neck, as if he'd run a hand through it too many times. He looked normal, almost disarmingly so. She paused with her hand on the door handle, inhaling once, deeply, then she pushed it open. The warm smell of roasted beans wrapped around her. The place was cozy, not polished a chalkboard menu with half-erased specials, mismatched chairs, a plant in the corner that probably needed water. A college kid in a hoodie tapped on a laptop. An older couple shared a muffin, talking quietly. No chandeliers, no string quartet, just Sunday afternoon and the soft clink of ceramic mugs. Daniel turned as the bell over the door chimed. When he saw her, his shoulders dropped in visible relief. "Hi," he said, and somehow the simple word felt more intimate than anything they'd said in the ballroom. "Hi," she echoed. He stepped toward her, stopping at a respectful distance. "I, got here early," he said. "Force of habit. I didn't want you to think I stood you up. I'm the one who's late," she said. "By 3 minutes. 3 concerning minutes," he replied. "You should have seen the performance I gave this cappuccino." She looked at the untouched cup in his hand. A small smile tugged at her mouth. "So, that's what a billionaire looks like when he's nervous." Color rose faintly in his cheeks. Apparently, the admission eased something inside her. If he could be uneasy, she didn't have to pretend she wasn't. They ordered her a latte with 1 pump of vanilla because it felt like a small luxury. Him, another cappuccino because abandoning the first one halfway felt rude. They found a small table by the window, sunlight spilling across the wood, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the air. For a moment, they simply sat there, each adjusting to the sight of the other without dimmed lights and background music. "You look different," she said finally. "Better or worse, less intimidating." He chuckled. "Good. That was the goal. The suit's in time out today." She glanced down at her own outfit, dark jeans, a soft green blouse, flats she'd worn to work more times than she could count. She felt instantly aware of every wrinkle, every stray thread. Then she remembered the way he'd watched her last night and forced herself to breathe. "So," she said, hands wrapped around her mug for warmth, "what do people talk about when there's no open bar and no bouquet toss?" "Apparently," he said, They talk about coffee and pretend they're not terrified. Her laugh came easily. You're terrified of messing this up? He nodded. Yes, completely. She stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with everything she thought she knew about men like him. Tell me something ordinary about you, she said. He lifted a brow. Ordinary. Something that doesn't belong in a magazine profile. He thought for a moment. I can't fix my own dishwasher, he said. I watched 3 online videos and still ended up flooding half my kitchen. Lauren smiled. That's comforting. He leaned his forearms on the table, closer now, but not crowding. Your turn. Something ordinary. She considered. I have a drawer full of takeout menus that I never throw away because I'm convinced the one time I do, I'll need the number printed on the back. Highly relatable, he said. Most of my meals come in cardboard boxes. Don't you have, I don't know, a private chef or something, she asked, half teasing, half genuinely curious. He shook his head. I have a refrigerator with champagne I don't drink and leftovers I forget about. Glamorous? I know. His honesty chipped away at the image she'd built of him, piece by piece. The billionaire faded, leaving a man who sometimes ate alone at his kitchen counter. They talked. About work, her describing the ache of being dependable but overlooked. Him admitting that for years, he had measured his worth in quarterly reports and shareholder calls. Numbers, he said, staring at the swirl of foam in his cup. That's how I knew whether I was succeeding. Up was good. Down was disaster. Simple. And now she asked, Now, he said slowly. I'm realizing you can have all the numbers on your side and still feel like you've missed the point. She watched him, sensing the cost of that admission. Last night felt like that. He met her eyes. Last night, for the first time in a long time. I forgot to think about numbers. Warmth spread through her chest, slow and dangerous. She took a sip of her latte to hide the way her hands trembled. They talked about parenting. She described Mia's stubborn streak, her constant bargaining for extra screen time, the way she still, sometimes, crawled into Lauren's bed after a nightmare. Sounds like she trusts you, he said. Some days. Lauren replied. Other days I'm the villain who won't let her eat ice cream for breakfast. Villains have their place, he said. They keep 11-year-olds alive. She smiled. He told her about his sister's kids, how he showed up for birthdays and holidays with toys he had delivered, then realized the kids didn't care about the gifts as much as they cared about him staying to play. Do you, she asked, stay to play? More now than I used to, he said quietly. Less time on planes, more time on floors with Legos. She nodded, picturing him in that setting, sleeves rolled, tie off, somewhere between the life he'd built and the one he was still learning to live. They spoke of aging parents whose doctor's appointments multiplied without warning, of long Sundays when the house felt too quiet, of lying awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about the things they'd done and the things they hadn't. At some point, Lauren realized she'd stopped checking her reflection in the window, stopped worrying about whether her laugh lines were too deep, whether her nails were chipped. She was simply there, present, talking, and he was too still. A small voice inside her whispered questions. Was she too much work, too complicated? With a child and a mortgage and a bank account that didn't match his, would his world swallow her or reject her outright? She took a breath. The fears didn't disappear, but they didn't stop her from listening. After nearly 2 hours, the coffee shop began to empty. The late lunch crowd drifted in, bringing a hum of new noise. They stood, almost reluctantly, putting on coats that didn't belong in the same photograph, his clean-cut and tailored, hers older, with a loose thread near the cuff. They stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air was cool, the sky a flat winter gray. Cars rolled past in a steady stream. Somewhere, a dog barked behind a fence. Daniel turned to her, hands shoved lightly in his pockets again, as if he didn't quite know what to do with them. Lauren, he said, and there was something intent in his voice now, something that made her heart tap faster. Can I see you again? She swallowed. Because of the wedding, he shook his head. Because of you. The afternoon stretched between them, thin and fragile. Lauren looked at him, at the man who had listened to her in a ballroom, walked her to a rideshare, stood in a crowded cafe, and admitted he didn't know how to measure his own worth anymore. Was she ready for this to become real messy, complicated, unscripted? She didn't know. She only knew that whatever she said next would open a door, or close it. It wasn't the photo that hurt. It was the caption. Our girl finally found her way upstairs, as if she'd spent her whole life on the wrong floor. Lauren stared at the screen long after the image blurred. It was a candid shot from the wedding, Jenna mid-laugh, Alex lifting a glass, and herself in the background, slightly out of focus, standing near Daniel. Someone had circled her in red, added 3 laughing emojis, and underneath it, that cruel little line, half joke, half truth, and fully meant to sting. Her phone buzzed again, her aunt. She didn't answer. The voicemail came seconds later. Sweetheart, I'm just calling to say people are talking. Nothing bad, but, well, they're surprised. That's all. The rich brother. Imagine? Anyway, call me back. Lauren pressed the phone to her chest and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the kitchen around her felt too small, stacked mail by the toaster, a lunchbox drying on the counter, the hum of an old refrigerator that needed replacing months ago. She wished the gossip had come from strangers. Strangers didn't bother her. Family did, because family remembered the wedding she'd had in a poorly lit banquet hall where the DJ misspelled her name on the banner. Family remembered how Mark used to brag about taking care of his girl, as though she were some prize he'd won at a carnival. Family remembered the divorce too, the quiet one, the one no one asked about but everyone discussed. She remembered all of it. Her phone lit up again. This time, a text from Daniel. Thinking about you. How's your afternoon? Just reading it made her chest tighten in 2 opposite directions, one warm, one afraid. She typed back something short. Non-committal. A bland answer about errands. He responded with something light, teasing. She took longer to reply. Much longer, by evening. Her phone chimed again, just a simple, everything okay? She ignored it. By the next morning, a knot had formed under her ribs. A familiar knot, the one that always came before she disappointed someone. She'd learned to live with it during the divorce. Then during the first year of raising Mia alone, it returned now with unwelcome ease. Work didn't help. The fluorescent lights hummed. Her office chair wobbled. People walked past her cubicle talking about weekend plans. And she answered emails on autopilot. By lunchtime, she had typed and deleted a message to Daniel 6 times. Her fear argued with her in circles. You know how this ends? They always choose someone easier, someone polished, someone who doesn't carry her life in coupon folders. He's different. He's the same. Don't embarrass yourself. Every ping of her phone made her jump. By late afternoon, she finally checked his messages, a few simple ones, spaced respectfully apart. Hope your day's okay. I'm around if you want company. Or quiet. Quiet is good too. Nothing demanding, nothing entitled. That almost made it worse. She typed, long day. Sorry. He replied less than a minute later. No need to apologize. Want to talk later. She stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Then, without letting herself think, she typed, maybe this was never meant to be anything serious. The moment she hit send, her stomach dropped. The words looked harsher than she'd intended, stripped of tone, stripped of nuance. She pressed her palms to her face, resisting the urge to throw her phone across the room. A memory hit her ex-husband standing in their old living room, telling her she was making a big deal out of nothing, telling her she was too sensitive, telling her she should calm down. Times when she'd cried alone in the bathroom just to keep peace. She wasn't repeating that. Not again. But the fear of being laughed at, of being pitied, of being compared was louder than the truth. Her phone remained dark for several minutes. Then, finally, it lit up. I'll respect whatever you decide. But I hope you'll let me explain why this matters to me. Lauren felt something shift in her chest, something she didn't know how to name. He hadn't argued. He hadn't begged. He hadn't dismissed her either. He'd simply drawn a quiet line between letting her go and wanting to stay. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could choose silence. She could choose the old story she'd told herself so many times that people like him didn't stay, that she wasn't meant for anything more than the just enough she'd built. Or she could choose something terrifying, listening. Her phone buzzed again just once. A follow-up. Whenever you're ready. She set the phone down, face down on the couch cushion, but she couldn't walk away from it. The words lingered in the room, like someone waiting politely at the edge of an open doorway. Was she ready? She didn't know. She only knew that fear had made too many decisions in her life already. And yet, she didn't turn the phone back over. Not yet. Of all the places Lauren had imagined having her heart questioned, the row between the dented minivan and the luxury SUV hadn't even made the list. She froze mid-reach, a carton of discounted yogurt balanced in her hand. The late-day sun stretched long across the asphalt, turning the grocery store parking lot into a wash of gold and shadow. There, walking toward her with quiet purpose, was Daniel, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, as though he wasn't sure whether he was welcome. For a moment, she wondered if she was imagining him. Men like him didn't show up in places like this, not in her world of clearance aisles and loyalty card discounts. But he stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the worry in his eyes. "Can we talk for 5 minutes?" he asked. No pressure, no accusation, just a man standing in front of her, waiting. Lauren swallowed, suddenly aware of the wilting bag of spinach hanging half out of her trunk. "You came here." He gave a small, awkward smile. "Your aunt told me you might be getting groceries tonight. I didn't want to call again and bother you, so I took my chances." Her aunt, of course. That woman meant well, but she loved a little meddling almost as much as she loved her crossword puzzles. Lauren set the yogurt in the trunk and closed it carefully, as if buying herself seconds of clarity. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. 5 minutes, she said softly. They stood between the shopping carts and car doors, the smell of rubber and warm asphalt rising around them. A young mother pushed a stroller past. A man loaded cases of bottled water into his truck. Life moved normally, indifferently, while her world narrowed to the man in front of her. Daniel spoke first. "I know I might have surprised you," he said, "and I know you've been pulling back. I'm not here to pressure you into anything. I just want to be honest." Lauren wrapped her arms around herself, honest about what he exhaled, long and steady. "I want time with you, real time, not a fling, not a storyline for anyone else. Just time to see what this is." Her breath caught. She glanced away toward the sunset bleeding across the sky, remembering every bruise left behind by her past. Daniel continued, voice quieter now. "And I need you to know I have my fears too. I've spent years feeling like a paycheck instead of a person. Years convincing myself I didn't need anyone because it was easier than wondering if they only wanted the smooth parts of me." His voice almost wavered. It startled her. He wasn't performing. He wasn't charming. He wasn't trying to be impressive. He was simply a man who'd been alone too long. Still, she felt the old defenses rising. "People are talking," she whispered. "Family, online. They think I'm upgrading." The word burned. Daniel nodded slowly. "I figured something like that might happen." She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "And what, you thought you could show up in a parking lot and fix it?" "No," he said gently. "I came because I didn't want you facing it alone." His simplicity disarmed her more than any grand gesture could have. She rubbed her hands together, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have Mia to think about. She's 11. She's already seen too much change, too many broken promises. I can't bring someone into her life unless I know her voice cracked." He stepped forward half a pace, careful not to crowd her. "I don't want to meet her. Not yet. That's your call. All I'm asking is a chance to know you better. one step at a time. Lauren fought back tears she didn't want to shed in a parking lot where teenagers collected abandoned carts. What if I mess everything up? What if she thinks I'm foolish? What if you leave? There it was. The fear that had been choking her all week finally found air. Daniel looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before something close to tenderness edged with his own sorrow. Then, let's go slow enough, he said, that both of you can see who I am. Not my bank account, not my last name, me. The words broke through her like warm water through cracked earth. Lauren covered her mouth with her hand. A small, shuddering breath escaped her before she could stop it. I'm scared, Daniel. He nodded. So am I. They stood there, the sun slipping lower, painting the parking lot in softer gold. The world around them hummed with car engines and grocery carts rattling over pavement. It felt profoundly ordinary and, somehow, exactly right. Finally, she lowered her hand. One day at a time, she said, that's all I can promise. Daniel didn't smile brightly or triumphantly. He just let his shoulders drop in quiet relief, as if that simple sentence meant more than any yes could have. One day at a time, he repeated. But even as she said it, Lauren wondered would one day at a time be enough to build something real. She didn't know, and that not knowing lived inside her, fragile and trembling, as Daniel waited for her next breath. From the park bench, Lauren watched her daughter wobble down the path, one hand finally lifting off the handlebars. It struck her that bravery rarely looked dramatic. Most days, it just looked like trying again. The late afternoon sun filtered through the maples in thin, honey-colored sheets. The air carried that early spring coolness that made people linger outdoors just a little longer than they meant to. On the far end of the loop, a dog barked at a squirrel. A jogger passed by with a friendly nod. Life moved softly around them, unhurried, uncomplicated. Lauren pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders and let out a small breath. Weeks had passed since the parking lot conversation. Weeks filled with quieter choices, gentler rhythms. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had shifted. Daniel sat beside her, one ankle resting over his knee, hands folded loosely. He wore a light jacket, something casual she hadn't imagined him owning that first night at the wedding. On the bench, he seemed reachable, ordinary, in a way that made her chest ache with something warm. She's getting steadier, he said, nodding toward Mia. Lauren smiled. She still panics sometimes on the turns. But she keeps going. Wonder where she gets that from, he said softly. She nudged him with her shoulder, but she didn't deny it. A month ago, she would have bristled at the idea that she was brave. Back then, she felt like someone constantly trying to stay upright financially, emotionally, in every way that mattered. But now, watching Mia pedal forward with her ponytail bouncing and her jacket flapping behind her, Lauren felt a quiet recognition rise inside her. Maybe showing up, even scared, counted for something. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Nearby, a father helped his toddler climb a slide, and a couple walked past, holding iced coffees. Ordinary scenes, gentle scenes, the kind of life she never thought would feel big enough, and now it felt like steadiness itself. Daniel leaned back slightly. I fixed that kitchen chair. By the way, he said, the back leg wasn't attached right. Lauren let out a soft laugh. You didn't have to do that. It was either that, he said, or watch you nearly fall on the floor every time you ate dinner. I didn't almost fall. You came close. She shook her head. Once, maybe twice. He gave her a knowing look. She rolled her eyes, but the teasing wasn't sharp. It was the easy, familiar kind that didn't require either of them to pretend. And she had her own reminders of him now, nudging him to eat something before a late meeting, texting him a picture of Mia's school project when he'd had a rough day, noticing how his voice softened when he talked about his late mother or his brother's new marriage. None of it was dramatic. None of it was glamorous. She realized, sitting on that bench, that she had forgotten to crave the dramatic. Mia circled back toward them, her cheeks flushed. Mom, Look, I'm doing it. I didn't even get scared on the curve, Lauren clapped. I saw. Look at you, Daniel added, quiet but certain. You both are. She turned to him, caught slightly off guard by the weight behind his words. He wasn't looking at Mia. He was looking at her with an expression that made her breath hitch, something like recognition mixed with tenderness. She looked away first, not out of fear, but because it felt too intimate to hold for more than a moment. Mia skidded to a stop, one foot dragging against the path. Can we stay a little longer? Of course, Lauren said. Daniel checked his watch and then slipped it back comfortably under his sleeve. I've got time. That was another change. He always seemed to have time now. Not endless hours, not unrealistic devotion, just small, intentional pockets of presence. Showing up when he said he would, calling when he promised, letting silence exist without trying to fix it. They walked the path together later, following Mia as she tested her confidence on the wider loop. A breeze tugged at Lauren's hair, and Daniel slowed his steps to match hers, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed. Something in the simplicity of it eased her pulse. Lauren felt the familiar flicker of fear, quiet, but still there. The old question, what if this falls apart? But another voice won. She was only beginning to trust, rose to meet it. And what if it doesn't? As they neared the parking lot, Mia shouted again. Race you to the gate and pedaled off with determined, wobbly energy. Lauren laughed, shaking her head. She thinks she's fearless now. She learned from you, Daniel said. No, she murmured. I think she learned despite me. He touched her arm lightly, just a brief brush, a grounding gesture. You give her steadiness. That's what makes bravery possible. They walked a few more steps before she asked, Do you ever worry we're doing this wrong, going too slow or too fast? All the time, he admitted quietly. But going slow feels like the right kind of careful. She nodded. I can live with that. Good. He hesitated for a breath. I'd like to keep choosing this. Choosing you, one day at a time. Her throat tightened, not painfully, but in that deep belly way, emotions rise when words align, exactly with something long awaited. One day at a time, she repeated. They gathered Mia and her bike, loading it into the trunk together with an ease that surprised her. When they drove back to her house, his car following hers, Lauren noticed something new on her patio table when she stepped inside later that evening. 3 cups, her coffee mug, still carrying a faint ring of morning cream, Mia's chipped hot chocolate mug with the fading snowman print, and the to-go cup Daniel always forgot to take with him. She stood there for a long moment, the soft clatter of Mia's sneakers in the hallway echoing through the house. 3 cups, not a declaration, not a promise of forever, just a quiet sign that life was expanding by inches, not leaps. She touched the rim of Daniel's cup, her fingers resting there as sunlight faded outside. What might one day at a time grow into, if 2 people kept choosing it, she didn't know. But for the first time in years, not knowing felt a little like hope. She sat alone at the edge of a crowded ballroom, staring at an empty chair the caterers had placed beside her, as if they were sure someone would come back for her. Around her, music swelled, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell like soft waves hitting a shore she no longer felt part of. The lights were warm, golden, gentle, yet Lauren's hand stayed cold against the stem of her champagne glass. She tried to look composed, like any other guest taking a quiet moment, but the truth pressed against her ribs. This was the kind of night where everyone seemed to belong to someone except her. And somewhere between the music and that stubborn, unclaimed chair, she wondered when exactly life had slipped from promise into something that looked a lot like standing off to the side, hoping no one noticed the loneliness she'd stopped admitting out loud. If you've ever felt left behind in a room full of people moving forward, this story might feel familiar. Let's begin. Thank you for spending a little of your time with this story tonight. Your presence here truly matters more than you know. If the story touched something in you, a simple like share or subscribe helps send a bit of kindness farther into the world. Wishing you warmth, gentleness, and a quiet moment of peace wherever you are.